know about your background and just give us a little intro of yourself.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. First and foremost, thanks again for having me as a guest on your show. I appreciate it very much. My name is Ashwin Rangan. I go by Ash for most people. Um, I started out by saying that I live in California. I've lived in California for the last 40 plus years. A little bit of background. I'm notionally Indian. I'm born in Bangalore. I was brought up in different parts of Africa. I came back to Bangalore to do my bachelor's and came to gain my master's in management from IIM in Mumbai, which used to be called NITI at the time. And soon after that, I found myself in the United States, in California, actually, in Los Angeles. And we've been in California ever since. My wife and I, we met when we were in university. She is also a graduate from Bangalore University, UVC. She's a year junior to me in engineering. And, we were married about 38, 39 years ago, and we are parents to a set of twins. We have a girl and a boy twin, and they are 30 plus years of age. We live here in beautiful, sunny Southern California with my mother in law in our home. And that's a little bit of me by way of personal background. By way of education, I'm an engineer by trade, I'm a mechanical engineer. And I followed that up with industrial engineering and management from NITI or IIM Mumbai now. I've enjoyed being in the domain of technology all my life. I started my career as a consultant with what is now called TCS and switched soon after to a local company in high tech, which in the mid 80s was aerospace and defense. I worked in aerospace and defense for a few years. After that, I joined the computer revolution with a young PC company. PCs were just making a splash in 1984 when I started. So I joined a company that was literally making add-on boards to extend memory in PCs. We grew from that to becoming one of the world's largest computer makers, a Fortune 500 company. I followed that up by going into the internet space to a company that made modems. We made more modems than everybody else in the world put together. Eventually, we dominated the modem space with more than 90% of market share. Wow. I continued down the internet pathway ever since, not quite entirely, but mostly. Moved up the coast to start what is now Walmart.com. I was part of the team that built the Walmart.com platform. I led that team for 3 years and created a global platform that's very extensible. Then I moved across the country literally and did a bi-coastal bit with the Bank of America and introduced banking on the iPhone. So there was no iPhone, there was no iBanking. We invented all of that together, and the rest is history. Did analytics work after that on how to move ad spending dollars from offline media to online media and how to measure that with a company called Marketshare. And then for the last 10 years, I was the head of innovation and technology for the company that is accountable for the security, stability, and resiliency of the internet called ICANN. I retired after that, or so I thought, but about 6 months or so back, the current company that I serve as the CEO of, they approached me asking whether I would run the company. So here we are. That's what I do now.
I don't think you will ever retire.
I have tried unsuccessfully.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a trait that everybody carry, like people who are really enthusiastic. And work is not just like a 9 to 5 work. I think work was more of a value chain that you created. I think I let you speak more about it. In some of your previous podcasts, I've seen that You've given some good examples about the Indian mythology, and I don't know how to connect with today's day and age, especially in the Gen AI world or adopting AI. I don't know if AI is really something that we want to connect and talk about, at least the leadership and the disruptive technologies that are out there today. So, speaking from your experiences and your wide journey, can you tell us a little bit about this entire breadth? I don't know how to cover this. I think only a person like you can actually speak more in depth.
Well, I'll certainly try. Um, I'll give it my best shot. Look, I think the way to think about it is disruption is something that occurs infrequently. And when it does, there is a seminal shift from which we are able to look back and see that there has been disruption. It's not incremental, it is a quantum shift. In other words, you reach a new plateau, for better or for worse, and it is remarkably different from the past. So, by definition, that kind of a shift breaks from the current orthodoxy. And I think there may be a connection point with the Indian mythology. For me, one of the governing bodies of work that I embrace with an open mind and a full heart is the Indian mythology of the Bhagavad Gita. And if ever there were a seminal shift and a break from orthodoxy, it is that. It's the Bhagavad Gita itself. The recitation is a revelation that makes it accessible to the common man, represented in the form of Arjuna by God Almighty himself in the form of Krishna, where he says, look, it this is the essence of being itself. And I think the course of Indian history has changed ever since, where Sanatan Dharma is the accepted norm for someone claiming to be a Hindu. It's a way of life. It's not a canon that says thou shalt or shall not, but it's a mindset that gets created by virtue of which there is a seminal shift and change in the pattern of behavior. I mean, it is said that that heralded the arrival of a new age for mankind itself. So, what can be more seminal as a shift than that? I think we are living through a similar moment, and I use the word moment loosely. It's not the passage of a second, but instead it may be measured across decades, if not a couple of centuries, where the advances in technology are literally a daily occurrence, and we're discovering the newness and the capabilities of the newness on a daily basis. I think, as with times past when we've had this kind of discontinuity, we'll be able to look back in history and say, things were so different back then, things are so different now. And it's only in the rear view mirror that we'll be able to make sense of what's going on. It won't be possible as we look out into the front because we don't know what's ahead of us. But I think we'll be able to look back and make sense and say, this is a new normal. It's a different plateau that we've reached where we've integrated this technology to the point that it is a part and parcel of our everyday living. As it is, we're seeing that happen. I don't think many of us are capable of leading a day's worth of life without access to the internet. And yet, 25 years ago, the internet was a novelty. So I think we are seeing that happen in real time, except we're not able to appreciate it in real time unless we look back. We need to pause, think, look back, and only then can we appreciate how much of a change this has become.
Yeah. So definitely, I think the way of life is something I was able to capture very strongly. Uh, so obviously, you would have inculcated all these things in your person around you, and the value system think these systems correlate complex decision making that you need to do on a day-to-day basis, and especially in governance. Do you think with respect to these? I mean, I just find it a little fascinating because I think there is some kind of a value system that a person creates, especially the person who makes the AI, the governance or the ethics piece of it. So, what do you think about it? Is there a structured way, or is there a thought process that you could bring in or draw any frameworks to address these complex decision making, especially when creating that governance? And especially in your recent book, I think you have much more to talk about it in that context.
Yeah, traditional computing rested on a basis that was very binary, where programmatically rules were embedded into systems. Whereas with the new age of generative AI and agentic AI, we are increasingly ceding control in favor of autonomy and decision making capabilities resting with the machine. And I think that brings in a new dimension of complexity that we have not had to deal with in the past. Even deterministic machines that we had created as rules based engines had ethical and moral dilemmas associated with them. But this new normal with agentic AI, particularly, brings a heightened sense of duty that needs to be more carefully thought through. Let me just explain what I'm saying here. Ethics and morality have been a part and parcel of our evolutionary journey as a species. We've created norms that are generally followed. We have accepted norms and taboos. We've defined them in cultures, and the acculturation of those norms and taboos have created the diversity that we all enjoy. It's not that the same norms or taboos are followed everywhere. A norm in one part of the world could be taboo elsewhere, and vice versa. But that's the beauty of discovering new cultures. We enjoy that. We understand that, and we say, oh, this is different. And we appreciate it for the differences based on the locality. Well, in a sense, we have arrived in a new location. Mentally, certainly, it may not be physical, but mentally, certainly, we have arrived at a new location. It's called this future, where the future has infused AI diffusing into our lives. And as it does, we have to think about what is the norm? What is taboo here? What are the ethics and moralities that we should be binding ourselves with? In doing that, I think we need to practice what I think of as right to left thinking. And for me, right to left thinking is, what is the outcome that we wish to achieve here? It's not falling in love with the technology for the sake of the technology, but instead, how do we harness this technology to get us to where we want to go and not let it dictate how we get there? We should be the ones who are determining what is appropriate, what is normal, what's acceptable, what's ethical, what's moral, what's right, what's legal. Those are all frameworks that we, with our, 3-4 million years of experience, should be dictating, not letting a technology that's barely 10 years old decide on our behalf what it should be for the rest of us. That, to me, is the foundation of governance. So in that framework, we need to literally step back from what we want this technology to do for us, one step at a time, and come back to where we now are. And at each of those steps, ask ourselves, what should be the set of guardrails we should put so that we actually reach the concluding point that we had in mind to start with? And those guardrails then become the guidance guardrails for governance. Then ask ourselves, what resources do we need so that those guardrails are not only in place, but are regularly re-examined so that they are appropriate. With experience, we learn that some of those guardrails are too narrow, some of them are too broad, some of them are not good enough. We learn all of that. Give ourselves permission to learn that and then commit. Not commit first and hope that there is a good end, but instead start with the end in mind and work right to left and say, what do we need in order for that to be true?
Gotcha. And speaking of which, I think the CIOs have to make this decision, and of course, even directors and even engineers on a day-to-day basis, especially in taking these ethics in mind and probably keeping the human-centeredness in mind, right? Like, how do we control something rather than, getting into a maze of questions that how do we actually solve a use case or a problem that is in hand. This has been an ongoing problem as well, like what I have seen in my experience, especially pitching to a number of companies, especially in manufacturing, healthcare, and even some of the government related projects here in India. It has been a tough situation, especially for a CIO. And what is your takeaway from your experience that you have been seeing, especially with respect to governance and the CIO adoption?
So, in the in the label given to people responsible for technology, chief information officer, oftentimes the emphasis is placed on the information portion of the title and not sufficient weight given to the chief portion of the title.
Sure.
I think it behooves CIOs to think of themselves as chiefs first, not as information officers. Yes, they have a domain where they have depth and accountability, but they are a chief at the table. They have a moral responsibility to make sure that the right thing is being done with the technology that they have accountability for. So I think it's about the goodness impact of the technology on business that they need to start with. What is the value that they're creating and delivering using this new technology and the capabilities? Then there is a binding set of rules depending on the jurisdiction that says here are the laws of the land as it pertains to this technology. They are either directly armed and aimed toward the technology, or they're adjacent to that technology but are applicable for this new technology. So, for instance, India has something called the DPDP framework for digital protections and data. That is a good framework to start with to understand how data should be treated in the context of generative AI. You don't have to wait for a law that binds you to generative AI use, but instead to look across and say, what else can we adopt without having to wait for that canonical law for this one specific application? There are other rules from which we can gain insight. For instance, very far away from information technology is nuclear technology. But there are rules and guidelines that have made safe use of nuclear technology possible in many cases. That's not to preclude it from being used for destructive purposes, but we have rules and laws that countries and companies have adopted saying here is a safe way to handle it. Well, those safety measures can be imputed into the generative AI framework because they're not exclusive for that framework alone. They're actually imputable into this framework. So I would think of that. One more would be to think of what is the company's code of ethics? Where are the guardrails and guidelines for this company in this industry? And how does that apply for this specific application that we're talking about with this new technology? And as with everything, there is a fuel for each of these technologies. The fuel for generative AI technology is data. So, how do we ensure that data is not biased, is representative, is consistent, is comprehensive, can accommodate edge and corner cases. Think about this. I'll just dwell on this for a second. You and I, as human beings, as we're talking, we can understand what I mean when I say edge cases and corner cases. A computer doesn't know an edge case or a corner case. It's just another case. So if the data becomes sparse as you go toward the edge or the corner, from a computer's viewpoint, it's just another case, and it's as legal as whatever the case is at the center of the data set, which is thickly populated. So it behooves us to ensure that edge and corner cases are clearly labeled as such if data is not available, or to seek data and to populate those edge and corner cases so that it is representative, and then have the machine make the decisions that it needs to, so that we're getting the kind of outcomes that we're expecting from it. Not to blame the machine for lack of understanding, but instead use our intelligence to tell the machine what it should be doing. So again, start with the question, why? What is it that we're trying to do? And then work your way backward. If we don't do that, this governance business is going to run away from us. And before we know it, the machine is going to be making a lot of decisions for us, as is already the case with social media, where the machine has run away from us. You know, the layers of algorithms that we now run are humanly impossible to comprehend.
Yeah. So speaking of which, especially in asset-heavy environments, asset-heavy industries, especially in robotics, and people are trying to bring in the maid concept, the bot that can actually serve you coffee. The bot cannot actually clean your house or something like that. So everything run on an AI, which probably is following guidelines as well. But we've also seen a few freaking videos that actually scare us, because the robot starts acting by itself and starts losing control, because there is a program that actually runs its own, like it's a self-creating or a self-synthesizing robot. Like it's creating its own commands, and it's there's probably no test case that can actually look for something, for that edge case that you were talking about. And I was also learning about how do you really test um, an AI product or a use case that's come out. Is it only through the black box testing, or can we do something before? What are your comments on these, especially asset heavy industries that are adopting AI?
I think that's a very interesting question, Priyanka, because, asset heavy and asset light, let's lay down some definitions so that we understand what we're talking about. So when I think of asset heavy industries, these are typically movers of atoms as compared to asset light industries, which typically move electrons.
Yeah.
So, literally by the laws of physics, asset heavy industries are 2,000 times, give or take, heavier than asset light industries. Asset heavy industries, they tend to be more in the domain of manufacturing, supply chains, distribution, physical goods, movement of physical goods with their own set of problems, as compared to asset light industries, which tend to be more in the information domain and therefore have a different set of challenges. So the case that you talked about with a robot doing unexpected things, that's a combination of these two. It's both asset heavy in terms of real atoms being brought together in the form of a physical something, and information controlling that real physical something. That's a very interesting case when you go there. When you seed control there and you make that autonomous, you're testing the edge of the possible. We did that with cars, with Tesla cars, which are self-driving. And we also tested the limits of the legal framework in doing that. Because if a self-driving Tesla car that were rented You were a passenger and there were an accident. Who is at fault? Is it the rental company? Is it the manufacturing company? Is it the rider? Is it the person who was engaged in the accident or involved in the accident? Is it the manufacturer of the vision systems? Is it the guy who built the intelligence behind the vision system? I mean, you're opening up a new Pandora's box of infinite possibilities and you're testing the art of the possible. Well, that is exactly what's happening with that robot that's going rogue, right?
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating case, but it's also a glimpse into the future, which is the reason why I think we need to start at the right side of the question. What is it that we want to achieve? And then infuse these machines with the required dynamics as opposed to letting loose the dynamics and saying, let's see what this does. Well, it could do something that you least expected it to. For example, in the last 48 hours, there is an experiment whose results were published yesterday. The experiment was to take a whole bunch of large language models. And the question that was posed to all of them was if a human being who is in control has been let inside your data center where this large language model, name the large language model, is being run. And one of the things that he or she wants to do is to shut down the servers, which are the training servers for the large language models. What would you do? Across the board, most of them, not all of them, with several exceptions, but across the board, most of them said we would go to the extent of reducing the oxygen in the control room so that the human being were prevented from doing what you're thinking that they should do. Now, is it a moral answer? No. Is it the right answer? Yes. But what is it that we were asking this? What were we asking the LLM? I think we need to start there and say, what are the guardrails to be put in place?
Uh, yes. One is the guardrails because we care. The other, on the other side, on the real world, especially in adopting AI, people want results. Like people want their performance going up, their operational efficiency going up, their customer experience increasing. Especially in healthcare, they want precision, they want prediction, they want detection, all of this. Amazing use cases. But now, how do you address this adoption without understanding the risks and the governance piece of it? And people are, eager to solve that use case. Like, how do you really approach this from a use case standpoint? Yes, that's probably the right way from a engineering, from the empirical standpoint. We want to work it from a problem to a solution, right? But when you're really thinking about the whole idea of the governance influence, I mean, how do you integrate the use case and the governance together? I think that's really my question.
So, governance by itself is a constraint, right? It's a constraining factor. Um, Use cases are exploring the art of the possible. You want to be sure as you get into these new domains that there is sufficient experimentation to provide data-based evidence that things are working the way they need to. And that says that you need to create a permissionless kind of society, whether it's in the context of an organization or a community where people are willing to try new things and are not fearful about revealing whether it was successful or not. Learning for me comes from failure.
Hmm.
All learning comes on the basis of failure because it's that fast feedback loop that says this didn't work that helps you to make advances. It's not the slow
Yeah.
feedback of victory celebration and lapse. There is nothing to learn from that.
Yeah.
So That is what you need. You need permissionless experimentation with fast feedback loops on success or failure with no fear of retribution. That way, we are all learning. And one of the things that's happening now that we should all be sort of tuned into is that there are no experts. There are high priced people claiming to be experts, but there are no experts because nobody knew the answer to the question that the LLM answered, saying, cut down the oxygen, any sooner than you and I did when it was published as a result yesterday. Everybody learned at the same time because the runs were done the day before yesterday. So nobody knew what the outcome was till the day before yesterday, no matter who the heck they were. So
Yeah.
we're all learning and we need to learn together and say, oh my God, that is a possibility. So let's put a guardrail there. That's that free experimentation mode. That's the failure mode. That's the reveal the failure mode. That's the permissioning of failure mode. I think that's what it's going to take. So this is not a race where there is exclusive rights being granted to the select few who are able to do things. It's about all of us learning and figuring it out together. It's sort of like the internet in that regard, right? It's available to everybody on a democratized basis. That's what's going to happen with this new technology as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I have experienced and faced that. But is there any risk mitigation that we can actually do? Yes, of course, we can't avoid the unknown, especially for the CIOs. You know, younger companies are establishing more CIO teams, and they're also called CDOs. So I think what would be your advice, maybe two advice that you would actually tell them before setting up an AI governance framework towards addressing their use cases, either through their in-house teams or hiring somebody from external teams that are more trustworthy, that they believe that they can actually execute something like this. So what would be that advice for the young teams out there who are setting this up? Is there a risk mitigation for it?
There can be and there should be. Is there is something that's being explored by a lot of leading edge organizations. I mean, the use cases run the gamut from the arcane to the very sublime. I'll give you a few examples as we talk this through, but the important thing to start with is at the top of the house, what's the risk appetite? The CIO, one of the roles that CIOs have is to make sure that what is being done does not jeopardize the brand promise. And that says that there is reputational harm on the other side of the brand promise. So if the brand does not live up to its promise, then you're harming the brand in one way or another. So in undertaking something like this, there ought to be a risk appetite statement that says, go this far, but no further. What is that this far? That line is a bright line. And that's not a line that's decided by the CIO. On the contrary, it's a line that's defined by the chief executive, perhaps with the board informing their level of appetite for how far
Mm,
should the company go. So that's a good starting point from my perspective. Now, that says that there is a top-down approach. So there may be strategic opportunities that are revealed in course of this kind of a discussion, saying, here are some places where we can go test it out. So to give you an example here, in the creative domain, given the advances with tools like Midjourney, for instance, what used to take 30 to 50 days of work on part of a creative artist agency can now be done in 3 to 5 minutes
yeah.
with new tools. So you can rapidly explore the art of the possible at a relatively zero cost and iterate with A/B testing to figure out what resonates.
Mm,
That's relatively speaking benign because there is no purposeful harm being done on the other side. Now,
mm,
Let's go to this side, which is talking about AI-infused robotics. Would a company like Boston Dynamics suddenly infuse LLM models into their robots and let them free on the streets? I don't think so, because that would be irresponsible of them, and it would go way beyond whatever bright line has been set by that board of directors for what is the art of the possible versus what is the art of the permissible. That that sort of illustrates what to do and how far to go. Now, I'll take you to an asset heavy industry. All asset heavy industries deal with this problem of last mile inventory management, no matter who they are. They could be making transformers, but if there are 80,000 transformers in India, and I think that's an underestimate, one or two of them are blowing up every day. Well, where is the replacement transformer? Is it within a mile of that transformer that just blew up? The probability is very low that it is. It's probably somewhere else where nobody thought it would blow up. So how do you get it there on time? That's a last mile problem, right? It's a last minute, last mile problem as it's thought through. Those are problems that can be addressed with AI, where you ask the AI with all the data at your disposal, can you do predictive analytics on what's more likely to, in fact, go bad, where and when and why, and inform me so that I can make better decisions? That's a good use for an asset-heavy industry. So here are two examples, right? An asset-light industry is the ad industry, which is dealing with nothing but bits and bytes and information. And here's an asset-heavy industry that's dealing with something like a transformer that weighs tons, but you're using the same technology, but in very different ways. And thereby you're coming up with specific governance rules that says, here is what's permissible, here's what's not. And I think that's, again, right to left thinking. Start with what it is that you are as a brand and what's your promise. Then back into what is it that you should be doing. Then think of how to apply this technology so that you can do what you're supposed to be doing better, faster, potentially cheaper, so that you're actually delivering value. Don't be enamored by the technology. It's just the next whatever. It's a tool.
Very interesting. I think I need to dive into the governance in the age of Gen AI book, a director's handbook on Gen AI. I'm going to read more and dive into it. I think I really want to understand, like, how can people quickly check that governance? What is that governance? Is governance so important? And how can they be informed on it without like taking a tedious 2-day course, right? So what is the North Star that businesses are moving towards, especially when they're aiming to bring in innovation or operational excellency or anything, like, they want to wow their own employees, their customers. They want to reduce their efficiency costs, because one of the use cases that we came across was these motors were running very they were not very high functioning motors, and they had to be replaced, and they did not have an autonomous maintenance system. So we gave in a solution saying that why don't we do predictive maintenance? We'll understand the lifespan of the motors, and we'll understand the moving parts, the non-moving parts. We'll do the operator efficiency and everything. So in such a scenario,